Mirëmbrëma dhe mirëseverin kallëzo për një me. Qeveria gjermane ka emëru një të deleguar special për të marrë me Ballkanin Perëndimor në mars të këtij viti. Ai ka emrin Manuel Sarrazin, edhe ka me majt këtë pozit në disa vite të ardhshme. Gjatë vizitës së tij në Kosovë, si për herë të parë si përfaqësues i Gjermanisë, kemi realizu një intervistë për të pa dhe diskutu për Kosovën edhe planet e qeverisë gjermane në gjithë Ballkanin Perëndimor. Intervistën e filmuar para disa ditësh do e ndjekim sonte. Pas kësaj interviste bashk do të ndjekim edhe një reportazh të përgatitur nga ekipi kallëzo.com, i cili flet për njërin nga rastet e para të hetimit financiar në një dosje të fajdeve. Është shumë e rëndësishme të potencohet se hetimi i këtij rasti është inicu prej kallëzuesit që fillimisht e ka raportuar në kallëzo.com. Reportazhin do e ndjekim në pjesën e dytë, ndërsa tani ta ndjekim intervistën me zotri Sarrazinin. Mr. Sarrazin, you became Germany's Western Balkans envoy on March 2022. Now, your appointment comes 30 years after the war started in Bosnia, 20 years after the war in Kosovo. Majority of people would be asking, why 30 years after the war in Bosnia and 20 in Kosovo, we still need a special envoy for our region?
Because the West Balkan 6 states are yet not in the European Union, and the federal government of Germany gave me the task to be helpful on that path. So my job is finished when you're in the European Union.
US also has special envoys, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not linked to entering the EU. Are you sure that posts of special envoys have not got the shadow of actually overseeing unresolved conflict rather than just getting a country into the EU?
No, actually not. Actually, it's a sign of the German government that we are engaged in the region and that we want to intensify our engagement for facilitating European accession process together with the partners in the Western Balkan 6 and those partners in the European Union and abroad who are engaged in the Western Balkan 6. So it's a kind of sign of love.
Sign of love. How many more decades are we going to have this sign of love? The trick question is, how many more years do you think these Western Balkan countries will enter the EU?
Actually, nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
And the classical European Union answer is that's up to you. Yeah, it's up to how fast the reform process of the states are. And I know that this answer, to a certain extent, it's still true, but credibility of this answer is in a problematic situation. It's shadowed by lack of delivery of the European Union.
So more special envoys does not mean we get closer to the EU.
Not alone. I mean, in the end, I can only be helpful in facilitating, as well as my colleagues, especially those ones who are on Brussels payroll, with whom we are closely cooperating. Yeah, so it's always about political will, and political will on both sides. But to say this way, the political will here is important, but of course I can be helpful also for political will in Brussels and in the European Union. And the clear commitment of the German government is at least a step. It's not the way to be done, but it's an important step.
So if we were to ask you of your analysis since the end of the wars in the Balkans, what has gone wrong if 20 years after the NATO bombing, 30 years since the war started in Bosnia, we are hardly close to the EU, or we've made turtle steps, let's say? What is your analysis? Why is this so?
Yeah, I mean, you didn't give me this question like 2 weeks ago to think about it in depth. I would say missed opportunities and not enough political will. Yeah, but you know that there is the saying about Western Balkans, no opportunity is well enough to not miss it. Yeah, and today we are in a situation that we have to build opportunities again. We are not in a situation anymore that we can afford to miss more opportunities. And if you look to the situation in Ukraine, it is showing us that staying in between might have horrible consequences. Yeah, so it should be a push for the region, but also for us in our approach to the regions to say this this in-between phase must be an in-between phase and not a permanent status. Yeah? Otherwise, it is not in our security and strategic interest.
Yeah, for us, a reason why I'm pushing you is for us, the in-between phase is lasting more than the conflict itself. It's been 20 years, the in-between phase. But you are an historian, right?
Yes.
By profession. So I'd like to pick on that brain. As an historian, you talked now about Ukraine. I'd like to go to Ukraine. Do you see the history repeating itself in Ukraine?
No.
You don't?
I mean, there's the saying of Lenin, I think, that history is only repeating as in a satiric way. Yeah? As eine Farce in German. I don't really know how to translate it to English, but we have a repetition of Russian colonialism towards Ukraine. And we have a repetition of a situation that Ukraine is fighting for its own national survival with a lot of courage and heart. And this is, to a certain extent, a repetition, because the braveness of Ukrainians has been well known in former Soviet Union. They were fighting against the Nazis so fiercely in the woods, and this is what they show now, that they can stand up for their own freedom, but also for our values, as they did in the war. And it's so cynical that this kind of Russian regime is calling these people being Nazis, and they have to be denazified while they are fighting actually a fascist move. Yeah?
Exactly. So when you see this happening, basically we thought of Europe, generally is thought of as a peace project. In Europe, in the 90s, Milosevic could think that you can exterminate a nation. In 2022, Putin goes in, thinks you can exterminate a nation. Is Europe really the continent safe and peaceful that it was imagined to be? Or we just need to understand that every 20 years we can be threatened by some lunatic who wants to exterminate a nation or another?
Well, my answer would be quite simple to this with an historical comparison. In 1988, the Baltic states started the way into independence, which was then realized in different steps between 1990 and 1991. And as soon as they were independent, they decided to integrate as much as possible into all Western structures they could wherever find, including the Eurozone. And I always had to explain in Berlin, but also in Warsaw and Budapest, that they're really clever, because they know integrating in the currency is also security dimension, because as closely you are linked to everything European Western, as bigger is the probability that you will be defended in conflict. Other countries in the region, like Belarus, like Armenia, like Moldova, like Ukraine, other countries in this region as well, they didn't take the decision to really decide the sides. They were trying to develop another model which was like open in between, also economically, globally open state. Ukraine had this clear decision that they wanted to have good relationship to everybody, which is a good take. Yeah? And I think countries should be free to decide so. It's not the Western approach to not allow them. But it's clear that
Ukraine did set up an European future with a Maidan protest. It fought, and it was pro-European. Yet, when 2014 happened and Putin went to Crimea, what did the EU do?
I'm talking about 1991.
Okay.
Ukraine played between 1991 and 2013 a Vabonk. Yes.
In the meantime?
And since, I mean, I was pledging for Ukrainian Euro perspective since 2004. And it's not I mean, also Yanukovych, the former pro-Russian president of the country,
which was ousted by
was talking about European membership. Putin was saying he's in favor of Ukrainian EU membership. So and this is showing that you had a time when you had a better possibility to integrate to the West than today. So it also with Ukraine, but also here, 10 years ago, European Union was more attractive for the region, also for the Serbian president, I think, to integrate with.
Precisely. So, let's get to precisely this topic. More people in Serbia today are pro-Putin, according to the opinion polls. and there's been a yearly 10% drop in the pro-European sentiment of Serbia. So what do you think is the future there in terms of the fact that we are living next to a neighbor that doesn't see EU as a future?
I think it's clear that the European Union is the only viable future for Serbia if they want to be a successful, prosperous and peaceful country. And I think that this Ukrainian example, which I just stated, is a clear sign also to our friends in Serbia. But I mean, to be attractive, you must be first open-hearted. And then you must be also perhaps sexy. Yeah. So, and I mean, it's in the way that I think we have to really try to build back credibility of European enlargement promise. In 2003, we were promising in Thessaloniki. It's now 20 years later. The last 5 years, we have had more difficult or no decisions than really positive steps. So let's do what we can do now, which is opening up accession talks with North Macedonia and Albania, and finally doing visa liberalization with Kosovo. Correcting 2 mistakes, which we should have been done much earlier, these decisions, but correcting them.
You are stating those were mistakes?
To not do it,
yeah.
A clear mistake, big mistakes.
Big mistakes.
Yes, and perhaps now is the momentum where we can, even by correcting those mistakes, create a positive dynamics. Yeah?
So how do you comment Macron's offer for new political community for these states that are close to accession, like Albania and Macedonia, some in-between process? Is that a sign that France is far more reluctant to correct these mistakes compared to Germany?
What I know is that the French position on opening accession talks is clearly pro. They are willing to immediately engage with the organization of intergovernmental conference for opening the accession talks. And it's not linked to this new kind of concept or frame which has been put by Macron. I think that there is no other alternative than a full-fledged membership on eye level with respect for the citizens of the Western Balkan states as equal citizens of European Union. Nothing else will function, nothing else will be attractive. Do you know anybody who wants to become second-class member of something? I surely do not know, but is there such a feeling amongst the EU countries? I'm asking my colleagues, journalists from the Balkans, in Balkan Insight, actually are pushing this issue for you to clarify. They've asked me to ask you whether the EU integration proper process will be shelved and some in-between other process is going to begin. I don't believe in, again, new processes, and it is clear position of my chancellor, of my foreign minister, of myself, of my government. We want you to become members of European Union, full-fledged members, with all rights, with all duties, and on eye level, with respect. We want to treat you like...
Since you are in contact with Brussels, are they in the same line as you are?
Of course.
Are they this explicit?
No, of course.
So when will that process start?
Sorry?
When will that process start for Albania and Macedonia?
As soon as we get the unanimous decision in the Council. And there we have in the moment the situation that everybody is doing the best to convince our Bulgarian friends to not block it.
Are you convinced that you can do that? Are you confident you can do that, convince the Bulgarians not to block it?
This is a question which I cannot easily answer. I can tell you that we do whatever we can to do that. But I mean, what shall I promise when, you know, I cannot promise you for questions which are lying inside a Bulgarian government coalition. Like, who am I to look into these points? Yeah?
Okay, so clearly you cannot promise about Albania and Macedonia, but you yourself said it's a mistake that Kosovo was not given visa liberalization. Now, since you share our frustration, I don't know if you share, but people who are watching you,
yes.
There are students who cannot go and visit art galleries, museums, cities in Europe. There are women entrepreneurs who cannot go to fairs. By the time they apply for visa and by the time you get it, you cannot go to entrepreneurial fairs. What do you tell them today? You are the highest German diplomat that we are interviewing. What do you say to these people? What are you doing to help Kosovars get visa liberalization?
Like, we are trying to push these arguments to our friends. Yeah? We are talking to our friends and saying that, look, the criteria are fulfilled for a long time, and if we can be helpful in finding solutions for some sorrows which are there or not, we will be helpful, and trying to explain the political dimension of this. And also to be so explicit here, perhaps, I mean, first point, it is really important the European Union is showing to the people of Kosovo that this country is not at the end of the track. Yeah, because I mean, we have a hope that you will have a reform path in this country, which, although there might be other problems with recognition on the table, showing commitment to our values, yeah, by fighting corruption, by organizing more rule of law, and all this stuff which is important for us. So visa liberalization is also necessary to show to the people in Kosovo, we don't forget you. You are equals, not only with us, but also in the region.
Also, but
second
do you
understand,
point is, can I just
yes.
ask you about the mentality behind the stopping, not from Germany, but from other countries? What do these countries that are not approving Kosovo liberalization, what do they fear from? The 2 million Kosovars, less than 2 million, 1.7 million Kosovars, Albanians, Serbs, Roma, Egyptians that live here. What have they got so much to fear from in order to endanger Europe? What's the problem?
Well, I cannot explain you French, Dutch, or other member states' positions.
But what do they? What do they say in your private meetings? What's the problem?
Well, I think it's a political decision there. But I can just say that I was already frustrated when the German government had not a clear position some years ago. And I was an opposition member of parliament making pressure on the government, actually on the parts of government who were reluctant together with the parts of the government who were positive. And we were able to change the position together with the communication from Kosovo that problems which are practically there will be tackled. So it was also a work to do it in Germany.
So how did you change their mind?
With political pressure and with possible cooperation. And what I so far hear is that your government is in outreach with the French and they are talking about these topics. So I think both is important.
Okay, can I be more explicit?
Yes, of course, please. I heard that you are so explicit always.
Do you think they think there's racism involved? They think we're all criminals? Or they were going to criminalize their countries? Do you think there's racism involved?
I don't know. I think that there are problems with criminals from the Western Balkans and who are acting in cooperation, but also in a base in Western Europe. But I see this today also without having visa liberalization. I don't think that anybody who is criminally active needs visa liberalization for being able to travel to European Union.
Also, can you explain the experience that the countries, the EU is having liberalized, let's say, Albanians of Macedonia, Albanians of Montenegro, Albanians of South Serbia, Albanians of Albania? Is there any track record to believe that, okay, Kosovo is suffering because there is abuse in the system from Albanians of other regions?
In all situations of visa liberalization, may it be Georgia or Ukraine or North Macedonia or whatever, it was on the way that in the first months after visa liberalization, you had some anomalies in migration routing, because there were some, promises made, bus tickets sold, stuff like that. And usually it was in the way that quite fast, bilaterally, you could take some measures from communication, but also from controls, to normalize this again. And I think, it's important, I think it's quite clear to say that it's less expected that this will happen again with Kosovo, because we have experience with the region around.
Are Albanians more abusing the system than any other nations? Is there data to show that?
All data which I know, perhaps not on the latest state of art, is showing that all the data which is necessary criteria for making visa liberalization, and there is data, the criteria is that there is not massive abuse, otherwise the Commission would not say that the criteria are fulfilled, are not showing this. You don't have data which is showing that you have massive abuse of visas from people in Kosovo, for example, with the German embassy. Otherwise, we would not be in favor of visa liberalization. Yeah. So You cannot exclude that directly after such a situation for some weeks you would perhaps have anomalies, and then it's important that you know that together with the partners you would do everything to tackle it fast, and I'm sure that this would happen. So frankly, I don't see any technical reason why to not do visa liberalization. I don't see any reason to do it politically as well.
Okay,
but
so
I think it's a political decision.
Yes. Technical, there's no reason. Political part, I want to grill you a little bit on this, because there's a perception through some statements that EU officials have made that the dialogue with Serbia is conditioning visa liberalization. Is this true?
No.
You sure?
Yes.
Explicitly, there is no request on Kosovo to first make an agreement with Serbia, then you'll get visa liberalization.
No request.
Not even in diplomatic circles, behind closed doors, behind cameras. There is no such request.
From the German government, for sure not, and I don't know anybody else who would claim that. We want the Kosovo government to be...
Not from German government, from French and Dutch, from EU officials. I'm asking to you about these resistant states and resistant points to visa liberalization.
Well, I cannot comment for other member states, but I don't know any. I'm hearing this the first time. So might be that I'm not informed about something, might be that some rumors in Kosovo are on this, might be not grounded, but I think this would be ridiculous and insane. We want Kosovo to productively, constructively engage in normalization dialogue, to have a good technical approach there and to do something. This must be pushed again in a productive manner. Yeah? We need results there, really.
But one is not connected to the other?
Not at all, no.
Okay, so you want Kosovo to engage in normalization dialogue. People who watch you think we've been doing dialogue through different governments since independence of Kosovo. So we've been dialoguing with Serbia for a long time. What is different? What are your demands on Kosovo? What is Kosovo not doing and not engaging with?
Well, you know, I mean, first to say, we are passing this message clearly in Belgrade and in Kosovo. And then, of course, you would have some dossiers where perhaps you would say that, there we should be a bit more pressure to Serbia, and other dossiers, perhaps a bit more pressure on the Kosovo side.
But then you have
frankly,
facts and you can look at
yes,
facts.
you have facts, but, you know, like, frankly, I'm a German, and sometimes I'm a bit naive and stupid with, like, logics in the Western Balkans. I think the best pressure on Mr. Vučić to now deliver on specific points which are debated in the last weeks especially, and really concrete, is by being willing to bring something on the table from the outside. There's
like
nothing...
What? I mean, it's easy to say bring something.
The Kosovars should know better. I'm not here to instruct the tactics
I'm
for the
Kosovo.
normalization.
I really don't know better. So what would be something you expect Kosovo to bring?
We want Kosovo to be productive on dossiers. We have seen, I have to frankly say, we have seen that Kosovo was more productive in the last weeks on some of the hot issues which are at the table now. Yeah? So I think,
Such as?
I think on number plates, for example,
Yes.
but also on energy in the north, Kosovo was quite moving, and we hope that the Serbs are moving there now. I think that on other topics, Kosovo would have to choose. It would make a good pressure on Mr. Vučić if they also put more on the page. Yeah? And I know that this is not the logics in the region, but I think you can change the game with that. And in general, to say this perhaps, I mean, we have the Ukraine situation, we have shifting Russian and Chinese influence in the region, we have enlargement promise which is going down, we have difficult elections coming up, yeah? In US, for example, with the midterms election, then we don't know what will be in 2 years. So it is clear you don't have time forever. Enlargement credibility will be weakened if we don't get into track. World is getting more dangerous. And in this moment, I think it's not the momentum for playing on time. And if we want to have the region together with the European path, with the Berlin process, and with the regional common market mechanism to integrate, we need to now engage in this. Yeah?
Precisely,
and I think,
because it's a dangerous time,
yes.
isn't it the normal logic to fast track the Western Balkans into the EU and NATO? Isn't this the most logical thing to do when you've got Putin invading Ukraine?
Without democracy, rule of law, and separation of powers in Serbia? I don't think that. We have to stick to the criteria and to reinforce and make the process faster.
So, what is the incentive of Serbia? When you just noted a big problem there. What would be the incentive of Serbia to say, make a final agreement with Kosovo, if it's doing well as it is, opening chapters, it's getting military aid, buying guns from Russia, buying guns from China. On top of it, it gets maximum donations from EU and Germany. Just to note, since 2000, the German government has provided 2.3 billion euros to Serbia, being Germany's largest bilateral donor. EU has only in 2020 given Serbia 2.1 billion euros, according to the EU data. So Serbia is getting EU money, German money, and buying planes and guns from Russia. Why should it make any agreement?
If you're a member in the European Union, you get much more money, by the way.
It's fine as it is. It wants Arab money. It wants Russian money. It can do with that, because majority of the smart people are leaving Russia, leaving Serbia. Not many want to stay. Same with Western Balkans, but particularly in Serbia. Those who cannot get a job through political parties are leaving Serbia. So there's no pressure on that country to enter the EU that much. What is the incentive?
I mean, countries have to, you become a member of the European Union when you want that. And of course, we are trying to be attractive. We have a process that you have to stick to criteria. But in the end, it's the decision of the Serbian people and the Serbian political structures to do so. And then, of course, of the European Union to accept. And if the criteria, and to wage if the criteria are fulfilled. I'm confident that the Serbian people know that the only viable path for the country is towards the European Union. I don't think that anybody in Serbia, a lot of people in Serbia, the majority, can truly believe that being a third power, bloc-free state in this part of the region with this geopolitical surroundings is a good development model. And
I don't think, but their country is not imposing sanctions on Russia.
And I'm also convinced that their business model is relying on our investment money, which was also and is also relying on the enlargement promise. So the credibility of the path towards the European Union is part of the Serbian business model. And I think it's, time is running.
Russia's investment in it. So is China's investment. So is Arab investment in it.
Time is running to reaffirm this. And if Serbia wants to decide to prefer Chinese investment over German, this is not what I'm watching there.
Okay.
I'm watching that Chinese are able to invest mainly in areas where we have not been investing, or we have been not capable to meet the Serbian way criteria to that extent. So I think more engagement in Serbia of the European Union and Germany, as well as more engagement of Europe and Germany in Kosovo, as well in Montenegro, Albania, North Macedonia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina is the right way.
Why should the rest of Serbia's neighbors, especially Kosovo and Bosnia, pay the price of Serbia's reluctance to have the political will to move to the EU, everything it needs to do? Why should we be hostage to Serbia's wanting or not democracy?
I understand that many people in Kosovo feel being taken to a certain extent hostage of Serbia, and I understand that they have some doubts that normalization dialogue will be successful in delivering this.
Exactly.
But frankly, I don't see any better way how to get out of this situation than engaging positively in normalization dialogue.
Fine, but most Kosovars feel that we don't have a separate integration process, a fair country, Kosovo with the EU, independent integration process compared to Serbia. Serbia is talking to the EU, continuing its opening of chapters without having to make a deal with Kosovo agreements. Why can't Kosovo continue its own separate path to the EU without being conditions condition to make a deal with Serbia?
I mean, in this kind of formulating the question, you're right. But you can also take it different. For both countries, for Kosovo and Serbia, it is clear that only with a successful normalization dialogue, the way to European Union will be there. It's for both valid.
I know, that's the final deal. But from the beginning, you're telling Kosovo, from the don't move. You can't move to the EU without a final deal from Serbia. From now on, there's no separate process, separate path from Kosovo.
No, of course we're engaging individually with Kosovo as German government. We are spending also a lot
EU isn't.
EU is also doing a lot of stuff in Kosovo. You're also getting European funds, and we are also trying to be helpful for the European level in engaging with your country, of course. But I think there's one more point to see. I mean, even if you are reluctant or you're sorrowful that your communication and normalization dialogue to Belgrade will be helpful for political decisions done there.
But this is a Belgrade.
Don't forget that it's also a play field for showing to the others that Kosovo is the right partner, that Kosovo is doing the right steps, that Kosovo is productive, that problems in normalization dialogue is not taking place because of Kosovo. And the same is for the RCM and the regional market.
Okay,
I mean,
so you think we need to show it, but on the other hand, are you watching the fact that Serbia does not want to put sanctions on Russia? Serbia buys weapons from Russia. What does this sign tell you? Because this sign clearly tells us a lot. This is the devil we know. The Minister of Information of Milosevic is Mr. Vučić. He was Minister of Information of Milosevic. So this is the devil we know. Now that they are buying guns from Russia, they do not put sanctions. What is the EU's position? Are you going to tolerate it and pretend nothing happened?
We have a clear expectation towards the Serbian government and towards the Serbian president to align with the common security policy.
And if he doesn't align?
I mean, this is the basis of our cooperation. The Stability and Association Agreement is one of the key findings, always increasing alignment with the common security foreign policy. This doesn't mean that it's from the first moment completely aligned, but increasingly aligned. Yeah? And we want to see that this is delivered by Mr. Vučić and his government. I mean, in the moment it's an intermediate government, but whatever. Yeah? And I mean, we clearly express this towards the Serbs as well. Yeah? So this is the situation, the state of art. And I mean, it's clear that the question of alignment is also having some results in the willingness of member states to engage in the enlargement process. Yeah? I mean, you can have different reasons why you're cautious on opening new clusters, but there are many member states in the European Union who also now will link this clearly to the GSFP alignment. But I'm not so sure. I mean, you know, Kosovo has a real strength in being so clearly on the European side there, also in being so clearly pro-Ukrainian. Yeah?
But it doesn't pay off, because it seems like, oh, Kosovo is not dangerous. Let's leave Kosovo, not give it anything, because it's the baby that doesn't cry. It's pro-European, it's pro-Ukrainian. Let them continue.
It will pay off, I'm sure of that.
When?
You will see it.
I know we will see it eventually, but we've got journalists also in this office who cannot travel for training, who cannot travel and cover a story. Give us a time frame. Do you get any time frame for visa liberalization? We will see something.
I'm the wrong member state, you ask.
You are a wrong member state. For you, it would happen tomorrow. Yes.
If you put it, I mean, there was this idea, like, should we put it on the list? No, we should put it on the list when we know that it will be voted. But if it's on the topical list tomorrow, Germany will vote yes.
Okay, but do you see Europe basically treating the Balkans with the same tolerance it treated the moment when Russia went to Crimea in 2014? Europe didn't do anything. Today, Serbia arms itself. We see maybe Europe tolerant, not taking that seriously. As Bosnians living in the Balkans, as Albanians living in the Balkans, do you think we are right to believe that they can tomorrow take any measures take military measures, and until then Europe will not wake up to the fact, because it is automatically, technocratically tolerant of these ideas. It's tolerant on Orban being also pro-Russian, is tolerant on several influences that have happened from Russia. How far do you think Europe is going to tolerate this? Because people in the Balkans are fearful of conflict.
Well, I mean, you made a bit a mix of arguments. I will try to stick to this comparison towards Ukraine. And this is not a defense what I'm saying. I'm just trying to explain my take on the mistake. In 2014, Europe was not tolerant. Actually, Europe was stopping the war in front of Mariupol with clear cut, together with with Ukrainians fighting against Russian tanks, with a clear-cut threat of sanctions. And I think that, and then we had this Minsk I and Minsk II agreements, and for many people it was already since years clear that Russia is not trying to really solve this problem, but it was at least a better situation than an open war. And we thought that this kind of measures with sanctioning and for some member states also with weaponing Ukrainian defense would influence the decision-making in Putin by increasing the price for further escalation of the conflict for him. So the try was to escalate, to increase the price for possible escalation, and we thought that there is a price he will not be willing to pay. This was wrong. We see now that the price he is willing to pay is much higher than everything what we thought before. Also, those who are really critical about the Kremlin and even said that Europe is not doing enough in sanctioning, the pricing of Putin is out of this level. So seeing this, I think it's clear that some lessons are learned out of this.
Okay, some lessons are learned. I want to catch you here because people who are watching feel that Europe has not put enough pressure on Serbia and Vučić to go through a denazification process in which Germany went through. I know that many ordinary people have commented to me how Germany has, in the middle of Berlin, a really somber cemetery of Jewish people. Do you think we're ever going to see, or is Serbia going to ever have pressure to see cemetery of Albanian victims in Batajnica when the bodies of Albanians were discovered? Batajnica, the military grounds in Belgrade, which today do not have a single sign that bodies of Albanians came out of there.
Well, this is a difficult topic, especially to comment for a
but
German
as a German
official.
You've gone through an amazing process in your country. Can Serbia learn anything from that? You are the ones who can preach because you've done it yourself.
Yeah, but you know, last year Claudia Roth was the first high-ranked German official being present at the anniversary of the German massacre in Kragujevac. I don't think that Germans should go to Serbia and say, we are so great in our history work, do the same, because towards Greece, towards Serbia, towards Bosnia-Herzegovina, towards North Macedonia, also towards Albania, Kosovo and Bosnia-Herzegovina, I think the history policy of Germany, which is quite successful and quite impressive inside Germany. But here, I think we could be even more active on this. And I'm now a bit at the brink of what a special representative of German government can say, but as a person, I studied history. I was as an MP really engaging in this history politics stuff. I think that the German example, let's talk about Greece, this is less fishy. The Greeks are not seeing that Germany is the best example for openly talking about mistakes in the history in Greece. Yeah? And so I would not go to the Serbian politicians and say, our model of dealing with the past is the best example for you guys, because they would remind me on things my grandfather's generation did in your all countries, and then I would perhaps yet not be in that position.
But in your country today, you acknowledge the crime against the Jews.
Yes.
Serbia, 30 years after Srebrenica, 20 years after Kosovo war, does not acknowledge the crimes that happen in these countries. So how can you imagine in Europe, Germany being accepted to form the EU with, say, somebody like Goebbels, who was Minister of Information of Hitler and continuing to be in power? How can we engage with people who were Minister of Information in Milosevic era? Do you understand? I'm sorry to be making the parallel, but can you imagine EU accepting to be talking to Hitler's ministers 20 years after the Second World War ended? Can you imagine that?
Well, you're bringing me again on historical planks, which are... We had high representatives in German government in the 60s and 70s who had high-ranked positions in the Nazi regime as well, and they were, of course, being part in the European and West integration of Germany. But to put it other way, I think that we need a clear position on genocides and crimes which have been undertaken under the rule of Milosevic in the region, and we should also acknowledge victims. And I know that this is always a really difficult topic, but if we could reach in the normalization dialogue, for example, further steps on the question of missing persons, this would be so important to show that, not leave this topic of the war just behind and talk about the future. I think it's not working out, because in the end you can try to talk about the future, but the questions about the past will always come back to the surface. And I learned a lot about the war in Kosovo, because my party was in 1999 in a really changing situation. So the history of my party, the Greens, is so much linked to the sake of your country, and I think that it's really important to not forget about. And
so thanks. I'm tapping into your historian background, more into your special envoy of
Yes.
Western Balkan background. But I want to get also your take on what should change in the Western Balkans' attitude or acceptance to NATO. Kosovo wants to become part of NATO, especially since the Ukrainian conflict. Do you think, historically, we should fast forward applications of countries like Kosovo and the rest of the Western Balkan countries to cover the Adriatic Sea with NATO coverage?
Well, I totally understand every country which feels in NATO more safe than without. I mean, this is what we are seeing right now.
With Finland's application to
so
NATO?
I think every country having the democratic and free decision to join NATO is a clever state, yeah? And I mean, Germany is recognizing Kosovo as an independent state, so of course the final aim is to have Kosovo as a full-fledged member, an independent state in NATO and European Union. If the Serbs are having another decision on NATO, the European path is clear. It's their decision, I mean, and it's fine, yeah? It's not on us to decide about this. But I think it's important that regarding these aspirations of Kosovo, don't forget that you still have 5 non-recognizers, and not everybody is having such a clear-cut position like the Germans. And it should be done in a way that those ones are also capable of supporting or at least swallowing it. Yeah? And
is Germany ready to help Kosovo with other members advocate for its entry into NATO, or this is not your priority?
I mean, in the moment we have other topics on the topical list. Kosovo government just put other applications higher on the topical list.
The Council of Europe.
Council of Europe.
Yes.
In general, we are always willing to be helpful, but also we have to think that with some member states, perhaps we are not the best to be helpful if we are helpful. You understand what I mean? Yeah.
What do you think of Kosovo's application to Council of Europe in terms of how well is it prepared? I'm not asking of political will to support it, but do you think it's well prepared with what you've seen?
We are in favor of it, we support it, and we will do what we can to make it successful. What
does Kosovo need to do? What is your advice that Kosovo needs to do to make this a successful application?
Well,
not just a symbolic.
Frankly, I mean, I'm not the one going to give advices to your government.
But I want you to give advices to our government because you're a friendly country. Your advice could be useful to us. As media, we could also put public pressure on that. So if I ask you for advice, would you give it to me? What is Kosovo needs to do?
No, I wanted to finish the sentence, but I have the feeling that your government well knows what they're going to do.
Okay.
And they don't need advice on this. They prepared it, they know better with whom to talk, and yeah, it's more in the way that we will ask them like what you want us to do, where we can be helpful.
Okay.
And we will talk to the partners, we will be clear on our position, we will say it's an important signal that it's functioning now. But my feeling is that your government really knows that this is until the decision will be there. It's a long game, and it's like a marathon. So now you have to start to run and to walk and to walk and to walk. And you know that in a good marathon you should not run on the first kilometers because in the last kilometers it will take you then. You should have a clear path and a clear cadence to walk in. But we will join Kosovo all the way off the marathon route and. Give some drinks, cheer and support, and talk to everybody to support Kosovo as well. We want this to be successful.
A little bit about the Berlin process. Chancellor Scholz has put forward that Berlin process will be reinstated. On the other side, there was an active sabotage of Berlin process by a parallel Open Balkans process that started in the meantime. You were in Belgrade. Can you tell us first, is Serbia ready to join the Berlin process?
I have the clear feeling, yes. Serbia is lucky that there's a clear recommitment to the Berlin process by the German Chancellor and the whole German government. And this is an important signal that we are going on this track. And actually, I think Berlin process can be so attractive that everything else might be welcome, is helpful. Yeah, or perhaps not helpful. Yeah, Berlin process if there is an inclusive process, and it's important to deliver there. And I mean, on the questions, for example, if we are able to be more successful on the regional common market, on the cooperation on the regional cooperation mechanism within the Berlin process, it's the best example to show that Open Balkans is perhaps a positive meant, but not so much needed initiative.
So, can you explain for our audience, what is your understanding of Open Balkans? The reason why I'm asking you is that, is there a document that has been shown to you? Is there a framework? What is Open Balkans?
Again, you're asking the wrong person. I've not created Open Balkans.
Of course you have.
I think that a big ideological fight on this and that, and then you have the other models, it's not the right way. I'm convinced that only full-fledged membership in the European Union is working out, that it must be done by inclusive processes where all six are joining, are willing to join, are able to join also, and where we don't create parallel structures which are not in line with a clear path to the European acquis. Yeah, and I mean, this is something which is underestimated in the debate, that if you build up too much like local initiatives with some partners, and this must be all in line with the European path, with the path towards the acquis.
So can you explain to people, is Open Balkans a parallel system to Berlin process, or are they two separate paths?
Frankly, I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know.
Is Berlin process in itself a process, the only process there is, supported by you as EU countries that support? Or are you also supporting, is your government also supporting Open Balkans?
No, we are clearly committed to the Berlin process. But I would read Open Balkan as a wish for Berlin process being more successful, and perhaps also a push and a pressure on us to deliver. Okay,
and has Open Balkans been successful compared to the Western Balkans?
Well, I'm also some significant numbers are sometimes told to me, but I have not really the ability to counter-check the economical result of this. And but I mean, those ones who were having this idea, I think they wanted to do something positive for the European path of the region. And then you can have a long quarrel if this is the right way, if they have chosen the right setting. But, let's not put everybody to the trenches who wants to be positive. Yeah? Let's try to take this like, there might be some ideas. Let's talk about this when everybody's invited to the inclusive process. And we have a setup for this, which is the Berlin process. And let's try to make the best out of it.
But also, if not only the Berlin process, you have Sofia commitments, RCC, the Region Cooperation Council, you now have Berlin process, you have CEFTA, other initiatives. If other initiatives, Mrs. Sarrazin, were not able to build regional cooperation, do we really need to invent the wheel and have another process? Because all these don't fit us and we want some people out and let's have another process?
Well, I mean, every process in the end will come to the question of how to handle Kosovo. And every process will in the end come to questions of how to name this. So I think we should try to find a way how to make Berlin process and the RCM successful and positively see the other ideas as a contribution to this process.
In the end, I just want to end with practical questions about, you said, car plates and energy. What has Kosovo precisely been constructive on, and what can we expect on the energy? Because this affects, majority of people watching this are still paying the bills for the north of Kosovo that is not paying its own bills. So we were told by our officials that in February this year, that agreement will start to be implemented. What's the situation like right now? You said Kosovo has made a move. Which move is now in order for us as taxpayers to stop paying for the North?
Well, I mean, you have to invite Mr. Lajczak to your TV show.
I have. He is not responding positively yet to my request for an interview.
So I cannot respond on his behalf. And as we are sitting here now, I mean, we are not live. So when this will be broadcasted tonight, perhaps we know already what happened today in Brussels. But I can just say that ask him for really concrete answers on this.
We will. Mr. Sarrazin, thanks a lot for the interview.
Faleminderit.
Ishte kjo intervista me Sarrazinin, përfaqësuesin e Gjermanisë për Ballkanin Perëndimor. Në nisjet e emisionit paralajmërova që kemi me ndjekë edhe reportazhin i cili na tregon për njërin nga rastet e para të hetimit të thellë financiar të Fajdeve. Ta ndjekim reportazhin e përgatitur nga Adelina Ahmeti.
Një histori e gjatë e Fajdeve nisi të zbuluar në fillim të vitit 2021. Një viktime Fajdeve u paraqit në kallëza.com me denoncimin se fajdegjejnë po i kërkojnë në vazhdimsi kamatën. Viktima në denoncimin e tij përmendte vetëm një person ndërsa ofroi dëshmi për mënyrën se si ishin dhënë paratë dhe si ishte organizuar mbledhja e kamatave. Dëshmitë e viktimës atko ishin bartur në prokurorinë e Pesë për t'u shndruar më pas në njëri nga rastet model të hetimit të dukurisë së Fajdeve. Pamjet nga operacioni i vitit të kaluar tregonin një person të rrezikshëm i cili pranonte 10.000 euro në emër të Fajdës, ndërsa arrinte dhe t'u ekte policisë për shkak të arrogancës së tij. Në zhvillime të tjera, personi ishte burgosur e më pas edhe akuzuar, ndërsa viktimat e Fajdeve në prokurorinë e Pesë rriteshin. Në mes të vitit 2021, një hetim tjetër niset ndaj grupit të Fajdeve në Dugaxhen. I pari grupi dyshohet se në fillim i dha viktimës shumën prej 5.000 eurosh me kamat prej 10%. Për shumën viktima paguante nga 500 euro në muaj cash në emër të kamatës, në ndërkohë viktima futet edhe më thellë në borxhe dhe kërkon shuma të tjera të Fajdeve tek i pandehuri. Të dhëna tregojnë se viktima pagoi 20.000 euro kamat dhe mbeti 25.000 euro borxh tek pjesëtari i parë i grupit. I pandehuri tjetër i akuzuar po ashtu pretendohet se i ka dhënë shumën prej 10.000 eurosh viktimës, ndërsa ky i fundit në emër të kamatave mujore kishte për obligim të paguante deri në 2.200 euro për paratë e marra. Hetimet tregojnë se në këtë formë paguan 20.000 euro kamata dhe mbeten edhe 15.000 euro borxhe. Sipas të dhënave të prokurorisë, 2 persona të akuzuar për fajde dhënë më pak se 20.000 euro para, ndërsa arritën të përfitojnë mbi 40.000 euro e po ashtu të mbanin të rezervuara mbi 30.000 euro në formë të borxhit. Grupi sipas aktakuzës ndihmoi edhe nga disa persona të tjerë, të cilët përshkruhen si njerëz që organizonin takimet apo ndihmonin në caktimin e takimeve. Prokuror, cilat janë rolet e tyre që i kanë pas në këtë rast?
2 pandehurët e parë veprën e kanë kryer veç e veç, secili veç e veç. Përkatësisht i pandehuri i parë i ka dhënë viktimës para me fajde rreth 10.000 euro, ndërsa viktima për këto para paguan në emër të fajdes rreth 15.000 euro. Rreth 20.000 euro kërkoi falje, ndërsa i pandehuri ja kërkon edhe 15.000 euro. Ndërsa i pandehuri i dytë ja ka dhënë viktimës para me fajde 18.200 euro. Mirë po i dëmtuari deri tani ka paguar rreth 20.000 euro në emër të fajdes, ndërsa i pandehuri ja kërkon edhe rreth 25.000 euro duke përfshirë edhe borxhin që e ka.
I pandehuri i tretë e ka veprën penale ndihmë në bashkëkryerje. Në çfarë forme ka ndihmuar?
I pandehuri i tretë i ka ndihmuar të pandehurit të parë duke i aranjuar takimet të pandehurit të parë me viktimen, duke mbajtur kontakt të vazhdueshëm mes pandehurit të parë dhe viktimes, saret që ka dalë bashkë me ta dhe kështu.
Për sa kohë, se çfarë periudhi janë kry gjithë këto takime, janë dhënë fajdet, janë marrë kamatat?
Në bazë provave që kemi siguruar, marrja me fajde ka filluar qysh në janarin e vitit 2020, ndërsa ka vazhduar deri me 15/9/2021 kur edhe është zbatuar masa e fshet deri simuluar.
Ç'është keni arrit me zbulu si rast? Ç'është ka nis?
Ky rast si qeni në ndiqeni, fillimisht është raportuar një rast më herët në kallxop.com në emisionin e juaj dhe pas raportimit të atij rasti kanë qenë të shpeshta rastet kur viktimat janë paraqitur direkt në porgrin themelore në PE dhe kanë raportuar rastet të fajdes. Edhe ky rast ka rrjedhë kësaj ku viktima është paraqitur direkt në zyrën e prokurisë, përkatësisht në zyrën time, dhe na kanë njoftuar se është viktimë e fajdes. Pas kësaj ne kemi filluar me marrjen e deklaratave, lëshimin e masave të fshehta deri me datën 15/9/2021 kur edhe kemi realizuar masën blera simuluar në një sendi.
Të pandehurit çka kanë deklaruar në lidhje me këtë rast? I keni intervistu, cilat kanë qenë arsyetimet e tyre?
Prej fillimit deri në fazën e ngritjes së aktakuzës, 3 pandehurët janë mbrojtur në heshtje.
Domethënë asnjëherë nuk kanë treguar çka kanë pas me viktimën edhe si ka funksionuar skema.
Jo, nuk kanë treguar, gjatë gjithë kohës janë mbrojtur në heshtje, kanë shfrytzuar drejtën e heshtjes.
Cilat prej provave tashmë i keni siguruar, çka keni siguru për me ngrit aktakuzën, sa ka zgjat periudha ngritjes së aktakuzës?
Periudha ngritjes së aktakuzës ka zgjat prej datës 15/9/2021 kur është realizuar masa deri me datën 10 maj 2022. Kur edhe kemi ngritur aktakuzën. Në provat që kemi siguruar janë të shumta, ka shumë raporte policore, ka incizime, audio incizime, përgjime telefonatash, deklaratat e dëshmitarëve, deklaratat e dëmtuarve, raporte financiare dhe të tjera.
Për sa para në total bëhet fjala, keni arrit me gjetë shumën e saktë, sa para janë dhënë, sa para janë marrë për anës të pandehurve?
Tek i pandehuri i parë, siç e potencova, i ka marrë 18.200 euro, ndërsa deri tani i ka paguar rreth 20.000 euro vetëm fajde. Ndërsa tek i pandehuri i dytë i ka marrë rreth 10.000 euro, ndërsa i ka paguar deri tani 20.000 euro, ndërsa i pandehuri ja kërkon edhe 15.000 euro, 5.000 euro në emër të fajdes, ndërsa 10.000 euro në emër të borxhit.
Dosja e hetimit të fajdeve në PE përpos sigurimit të dëshmive mbi transaksionet e parave është zgjeruar edhe në elementet e hetimit të prejardhjes së pasurisë për personat e dyshuar. Sipas llogaritjeve, vetëm nga viktimat të dyshuarit e fajdes morën mbi 40.000 euro interesa. Sipas ligjit, njëra nga veprimet kryesore në trajtimin e dosjeve të tilla është hetimi financiar. Dosja Dugaxhinit është duke u plotësuar me hetim financiar. Të gjithë të dyshuarit e këtij rasti janë duke u gjurmuar për prejardhjen e pasurisë dhe mënyrën se si i kanë të ndërtuar shtëpitë, banesat apo se si kanë bler pronat e veturat e tyre. Ç'është ka shku procesi i konfiskimit të pasurisë? Çka keni konfiskuar sakse shpranës të pandehurve?
Fillimisht janë sekuestruar 2 vetura, 4 telefon dhe disa prova që kryesisht janë kontrata, fleta, libra dhe regjistra. Po ashtu është lëshuar edhe urdhri për ngrirje për rreth 51.000 euro gjiro llogari bankare, një banesë në Prishtinë, një shtëpi në Pej dhe 30 hektar tokë. Për gjitha këto është siguruar edhe urdhri për ndalim afatgjat. Për 2 vetura dhe 4 telefon është propozuar edhe konfiskimi i përhershëm pas mbajtjes së shqyrtimit gjyqësor. Ndërsa nga xhirollogaria bankare është propozuar edhe konfiskimi i përhershëm i 20.000 euro si dobi pasurore e fituar me vepër penale dhe në këtë mënyrë të bëhet edhe kompenzimi i viktimës. Sa i përket 2 veturave dhe 4 telefonëve, ato janë propozuar që të bëhet konfiskimi i tyre si mjete me sa të është lehtësuar kryerja e veprës penale.
Përmendet edhe konfiskimin e përhershëm. Çka do të thotë konfiskimi i përhershëm ose si bëhet kjo, si kërkohet dhe sa është i rëndësishëm?
Unë personalisht mendoj që mjeti më efikas në luftimin e kriminalitetit është konfiskimi. Nëse vetëm dënohet dhe nuk merret pasuria e fituar me vepër penale, atëherë mendoj që nuk kemi për me luftu krimin sa do si shoqëri. Konfiskimi i përhershëm në kupton marrjen e pasurisë së fituar me vepër penale nga i pandehuri dhe në këtë formë mund bëhet edhe kompenzimi i viktimës, mirë po edhe në një farë formë do të rritet edhe orka shtetit. Në këtë rast, përpos që është propozuar konfiskimi sipas kodit të procedurës penale, ka filluar edhe aplikimi i ligjit për kompetencat e zgjeruara për konfiskimin e pasurisë.
Çka do të thotë kjo?
Në rastet kur dispozitat e kodit të procedurës penale janë të pamjaftueshme për konfiskimin përfundimtar të një pasurie, atëherë në Kosovë ekziston edhe një ligj i veçantë, ligji për kompetencat e zgjeruara për konfiskimin e pasurisë, i cili mundson konfiskimin e pasurisë të pajustifikuar. Do thotë kur nuk është e rregulluar me dispozitat të kodit të procedurës penale. Edhe në këtë rast çka kemi bërë, mas ngritjes së aktakuzës kemi marrë një vendim për hetimin për konfiskim të pasurisë, e cila përfshin periudhën 10 vjeçare prej kohës së fillimit të hetimeve në këtë rast, prej datës 15/10/2021. Ajo çka kemi arritur deri tani bëjmë, e kam lëshuar një urdhër kufizues të përkohshëm për një banesë në Prishtinë, një shtëpi, rreth 30.000 euro të mbetura në xhirollogari bankare, si dhe 30 hektar tokë. Po ashtu kam propozuar edhe apo kam parashkruar edhe kërkesën për lëshimin e urdhrit kufizues përfundimtar nga ana e gjykatës dhe tani jam në pritje të epilogut të kësaj kërkese në gjykatë.
A keni gjetë ose deri më tani te kush keni gjetë prej të pandehurve që nuk kanë arritur me justifiku pasurinë, ato që e keni konfisku?
Po. Deri tash në bazë të hetimeve që i kemi zhvilluar, 2 të pandehurit nuk kanë arritur të justifikojnë këtë pasuri. Dhe prova që kemi siguruar që të 2 hyrat e tyre janë shumë të vogla, ndërsa pasuria e tyre është shumë e madhe për karshit hyrave që i kanë. Prandaj edhe në këto rrethana si prokuror, mendoj që do ta parashtrojmë në fund procedurës, varësisht prej rrjedhave që do rrjedhen gjatë gjykimit, edhe kërkesën për verifikim të pasurisë, e cila do të përfshijë edhe konfiskimin e përhershëm të gjithë pasurisë së pajustifikuara. Nëse muj, pasuria e cila është e trashëguar më herët apo para periudhës 10 vjeçare nuk i nënshtrohet ligjit për kompetencat e zgjeruara për konfiskimin të pasurisë.
Prokurore përmendet që në xhirollogaritë e të pandehurve ka para shumë, po çka kanë bërë ata? Çka kanë punu?
Sa i përket xhirollogarive, vetëm njëri i pandehuri ka 2 xhirollogari me tolla që i përmenda, ndërsa tjetri ka patundshmëri më shumë. Të njëjtit në bazë dënave që kemi siguruar deri tash nga ora BK-ja dhe nga institucionet e tjera, as ata, mirë po as familjarët e tij nuk janë të posuar askund. Tyrat e tyre janë kryesisht pensionesh shumë të ulta, mirë po pasuria e tyre është shumë e madhe që nuk përkon me tyrat që i kanë.
Disa herë përmendëm edhe çështjen e konfiskimit të pajisjeve dhe mjeteve që i ke përdorur edhe në akt akuz. Po më intereson me ditë në telefonat tyre, kanë arritur me u hap edhe çfarë teknologji kanë përdorur ata ose a keni arritur me gjetë diçka brenda telefonave të tyre?
Po unë nuk do të shumë në këtë çështje për shkak se mund për me dëmtu ndoshta edhe procesin që do të jetë ditëve në vijim. Mirë po ka dëna që kemi arritur me nxjerr edhe nga ana e telefonëve.
Dëshmitara keni prokuror lidhje me këtë rast dhe sa i janë?
Po, dëshmitar kemi shumë dëshmitar dhe kemi marrë shumë dëshmitar edhe në pyetje gjatë fazës së hetimeve. Mirë, po në akt akuzë për momentin janë propozuar vetëm 6 ose 7 që të merren pyetje në shtypim gjyqësor, ndërsa pjesa tjetër nuk i referohen dëshmitarëve që kanë përmbru kryen e veprës penale. Mirë, po ata do t'i trajtojmë gjatë procedurës konform ligjit për kompetencat e zgjeruara.
Kur pritet me fillu edhe gjykimi ndaj këtyre të pandehurve?
Akt akuza, siç e përmenda, është ngritur me datën 10 maj 2022. Unë shpresoj që shumë shpejt do të fillojë me shqyrtimin gjyqësor, për shkak se e dini që edhe kodi i procedurës ka para fate strikte, sidomos kur akt akuza ngrihet kundër personave që janë në masa për sigurinë e prezencës të pandehurit. Edhe këtu besoj që shumë shpejt do të sohemi nga ana e gjyqtarës dhe do të fillojmë procesin gjyqësor.
A është kërkuar edhe një hetim i brendshëm financiar të pandehurve, kur është kërkuar edhe çysh shkon procedura?
prokurori i ka disa mundësi. Mundet karshi hetimit për me zhvillu edhe hetimin financiar, mirë po mundet edhe në bazë kitës aktakuzës, por mundet edhe pasi ta merr gjykimin e formës së prerë. Unë për vete kam preferuar që ta zhvilloj këtë procedurë pas ngritjes së aktakuzës, edhe pse masat për zhvillim dhëna financiare i kam siguruar para ngritjes së aktakuzës. Mirë po pasi e kam ngritur aktakuzën, menjëherë kam filluar me procedurat e këtij ligji. Ndërsa kërkesa përfundimtare për verifikim të pasurisë do të parashtrohet varësisht për rrjedhave që do jenë dhe kur ta marrim gjykimin e formës së prerë nëse do pandesh pallën fajtore.
Ç'ish bëhet hetimi financiar?
Hetimi financiar kryesisht në këtë rast është bërë me shërbimin e integruar financiar të Drejtorisë për hetimin e krimit organizuar në kuadër të Policisë së Kosovës. Fillimisht kam kërkuar lëshimin e një urdhri për zbulim dëna financiare për 2 të pandehurit e parë, që janë edhe kryes të veprave kriminale të Fajdës. Ndërsa në bashkëpunim me Policinë e Kosovës kemi arritur që të analizojmë, kontrollojmë gjitha dënat që kemi siguruar, kryesisht nga banka, nga oda e noterëve dhe kontrollat tjera që kemi arritur përmes gjatë ditës së ekzekutimit të urdhrit kontrollit.
A ka nis deri tash ky proces edhe çka keni ndorë deri tash?
Po, ky vetëm ka filluar, siç që përmenda me ligjin për kompetencat e zgjeruara, ka filluar me datën 12/5/2022. Deri tash kemi arritur ta identifikojmë banesën në Prishtinë, shtëpinë në një fshat në qytetin e Pesë, 30 hektar tokë, si dhe rreth 30.000 euro para të gatshme që janë të ngrira në banka, në 2 gjirologari bankare.
Sa është e rëndësishme me u bëni hetim financiar, jo vetëm për këtë rast, po edhe për rastet e tjera?
Siç e përmenda, në rastet kur lejohet bëhet hetimi financiar, unë mendoj që është detyrimisht të fillohet me hetimi financiar, për shkak se kjo përpoq që do të jetë mjeti më efikas në luftimin e kriminalitetit, do të ketë edhe efekte parandalues të tjerë që të mos kryejnë vepra penale, si do të ndikonte edhe në përmirësimin e imazhit të prokurorisë së shtetit në tërësi.
A keni pas më herët raste kur jo keni kërkuar me bëhet hetim financiar, çka ka rezultuar në gjykat? Ose çka ka ndodhur në rastet ku është përdor pra dhe hetimi financiar?
Edhe ligji si ligj është pak më i ri, domethënë Republikën e Kosovës. Në prokurimin themelor në pej ligji për kompetencat e zgjeruara është rasti i parë kur është aplikuar, ndërsa në prokuri tjera nëse do bëj ka një rast prokuria Prizrenit, në prokuri tjera nuk e di se a ka raste. Mirë po kem pas rast kur tashmë vetëm kem filluar edhe disa raste atë janë në procedurë sipër dhe pritet edhe raste tjera të aplikohet ligji për kompetencat e zgjeruara.
Prokurora na tregon procedurën çysh bëhet hetimi financiar.
Nëse referojmë ligjit për kompetencat e zgjeruara, ky ligj e lejon hetimin financiar vetëm pasi të merret gjykimi i formës së prerë për personat që shpallën fajtor për vepra penale të caktuara. Në këtë rast për veprën penale të Fajdës lejohet hetimi për konfiskim. Mirë po edhe përkundër kësaj ligji e lejon hetimin për konfiskim, siç e përmenda më herët edhe gjatë fazave të mëhershme para se të marrë gjykimin e formës së prerë. Unë e rekomandoj që është mënyrë më efikase që në mënyrë proporcionale me hetim zhvillohet edhe hetimi për konfiskim. Fillimisht prokurori nëse ka baza të dyshimit, atëherë duhet të iniciojë një hetim për konfiskim konform këtij ligji, pastaj duhet të nxjerrë një urdhër kufizues të përkohshëm, pastaj të kërkojë me një kërkesë për lëshimin e urdhrit kufizues përfundimtar, si dhe mund të parashtrojë edhe një kërkesë për zbulim të informacionit. Nëse gjitha këto rezultojnë me informata të bollshme që ekziston dyshimi që ka pasuri të pajustifikuar, atëherë prokurori çështës e ka mundësinë që masi ta merr tash gjykimin, të kërkojë verifikimin e pasurisë duke përfshirë edhe konfiskimin e përhershëm të saj.
Sa është i rëndësishëm që gjyqtari me marrë një urdhër të prerë ndaj personave të pandehur me u kry hetimi financiar? Është fjala për fajde?
Po, unë e konsideroj jashtëzakonisht të rëndësishëm për shkak se nuk janë trolla rastet kur personat janë pasuruar jashtëzakonisht shumë, ndërsa të hyrat i kanë teje të vogla dhe kjo ka ndikuar shumë edhe në opinionin publik, që në një farë formë edhe të zbehet ndoshta imazhi i gjyqësorit dhe prokurisë që nuk janë të punuar apo diçka të tillë. Prandaj unë mendoj se duhet bërë vlerësimi së provave që veç dhe të lëshohet urdhri kufizues përfundimtar i cili do të pasojë me kërkesën tjetër, e cila parashihet konform ligjit për kompetencat e zgjeruara.
Një dosje e madhe e hetimit financiar pritet të hapet në rajonin e Dugaxhinit. Banesa, shtëpi, konto bankare e vetura janë bllokuar ndërsa prokuroria pretendon që të sigurojë prova për të konfiskuar pasurinë e tyre. Sipas ligjit, prokuroria duhet të argumentojë që pasuritë e tyre kanë ardhur nga aktiviteti kriminal. 3 të pandehurit fillimisht janë arrestuar. Çka ka ndodhur me masat e sigurisë ndaj tyre? Fillimisht është kërkuar edhe paraburgimi, tutje çka ka ndodhur?
Tre të panderëve kanë qenë të arrestuar dhe ndaj dy të panderëve të parë, që atë janë dyshuar për vepër penale të Fajdës, është propozuar caktimi i masës së paraburgimit, ndërsa ndaj të panderëve të tretë është propozuar masa ndalimi për të ofruar vendit apo personit të caktuar. Kjo kërkesë është aprovuar dhe të njëjtë kanë qenë në paraburgim nëse nuk gaboj rreth 6 muaj. Për momentin gjenden në masën e arrestit shtëpiak dy të panderëve të parë, ndërsa i panderi i tretë gjenden në të njëjtën masë. Po ashtu me rastin e ngritjes së aktakuzës, kanë propozuar që t'ju vazhdohet kjo masë dhe sajm në deni është vazhduar deri me datën 17/7/2022.
A keni hasur që ndonjëherë të pandehurit kanë tentuar me thy masën arrestit shtëpiak?
Jo, deri tash informatat që i kam nuk e kanë thyer asnjëherë. Sa që kanë pas nevojë të kenë ndonjë kontroll mjekësor apo diçka të tillë, i di që kanë kërkuar leje prej anës së gjyqtarit. Unë mendoj se jo vetëm ky rast, mirë po edhe rastet që kemi pasur së fundit, sidomos 2 vitet e fundit, janë modeli më i mirë se si duhet bashkëpunuar me prokurorinë e shtetit, me gjyqësorin, me policinë e Kosovës dhe gjithë ata të cilët kanë informata apo janë viktime Fajdës, unë i apeloj që të paraqiten direkt në prokurorinë e shtetit apo në prokurorinë themelore në pej ose në policinë e Kosovës dhe ne ju garantojmë edhe fshehtësi të plot, mirë po edhe kryen hetimin në mënyrë profesionale dhe të pavarur, po ndikuar nga askush.
Pra dosja e Fajdeve të Pejës është përfundu vetëm për shkak se dikush ka raportu në kallzo.com, e ka ngrit çështjen e Fajdeve në kallzo, edhe mandej kemi marrë masa. Nëse jeni viktima të situatave të ngjashme, duhet me njëherë me raportu në kallzo.com. Fuqia e raportimit dëshmohet edhe në këtë rast, dikun mundët më marrë masa me njëherë. Me 10 të arrestuar në këtë rast, ka ndodhë për shkak të atij kallëzuesi. Edhe jënë me shumë pare të konfiskume për shkak të atij kallëzuesi. Vazhdoni me na shkruajnë kallzo.com deri në emisionin e radhës me në beqë.